Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is short, direct, and carries a question embedded in it that most of us could stand to mull over a little longer than we usually do. Even God doesn't propose to judge a man till his last days. Why should you and I? That's Dale Carnegie, author of How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the best-selling books of the 20th century, and still one of the most practically useful things ever written about human relationships. Carnegie was a Missouri-born teacher, lecturer, and writer who spent his career studying what actually makes people connect, persuade, and get along, not in theory, but in the messy, ego-driven reality of everyday human interaction. So, the question Carnegie is asking, why should you and I judge a man before his story is finished? The premise he's working from is straightforward. Even in the theological tradition Carnegie was drawing from, final judgment is deferred. It doesn't happen in the middle of a life. It happens at the end, when the whole picture is available, when the arc is complete, when context that wasn't visible earlier has had time to reveal itself. And Carnegie's point is simple. If that's the standard applied by the highest authority in the belief system most of his readers shared, why are ordinary human beings so quick to render permanent verdicts on the basis of partial information? We all do this. It's worth being honest about how naturally it comes. Someone makes a mistake, professionally, personally, publicly, and within hours the verdict is in. We know who they are. We know what it means. We know what kind of person does that. The trial is swift, the jury is confident, and the sentence is delivered before any of the context has had time to surface. And sometimes we're right, but often, more often than the confidence of our judgment would suggest, we're working with a fraction of the information we need to actually understand what we're looking at. The person who snapped at a colleague was dealing with a family crisis nobody knew about. The employee who underperformed was navigating a health issue they hadn't disclosed. The friend who disappeared for a year was fighting something they didn't yet have words for. The public figure whose worst moment got captured and circulated had a decade of character that never made it into the same frame. None of that excuses everything, but it changes the picture, and Carnegie's observation is simply that we almost never have the whole picture when we reach for judgment, and yet we judge as if we do. Let's recall some prior episodes that help shed some light on Carnegie's quote. Aeschylus told us that wisdom comes alone through suffering, that the full shape of a person is often only visible after the hard things have been endured and integrated. James Baldwin pointed out that children never fail to imitate their elders, that what people do is shaped by what they absorbed long before they had any say in the shaping. Both observations point towards to the same humility Carnegie is asking for. A person is not a single moment. They are an accumulating process, and rendering a final verdict on a process that hasn't finished yet is, at best, premature. There's also something worth noting about what judgment does to the person doing the judging. Carnegie understood this practically. His entire philosophy of human relations was built on the observation that people respond to being understood far better than they respond to being evaluated. The quick verdict doesn't just foreclose the possibility of understanding the other person, it forecloses the possibility of actually influencing them, helping them, or having a real relationship with them. You cannot genuinely connect with someone you've already written off. The judgment creates a distance that serves neither party. Alan Cohen gave us the observation that we discussed in a previous episode that pain comes not from the insult itself, but from the part of the mind that agrees with it. Carnegie is pointing at the giving side of that same dynamic. When you render a premature verdict on someone, you're not just expressing an opinion. You're potentially participating in the story they tell themselves about who they are, especially if they respect or depend on you. A judgment delivered with confidence by someone who matters to you can calcify into identity in ways the judge never intended, and the judged person can't easily escape. John Wooden gave us the distinction between character and reputation. That character is what you actually are, while reputation is what others think you are. Carnegie is making the companion argument. Don't let your assessment of someone's reputation foreclose your curiosity about their character. The two are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where most of the interesting and redemptive human story lives. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip it. Carnegie is not making an argument for the suspension of all discernment. Some behaviors are genuinely disqualifying regardless of context. Some patterns are real and consistent and dangerous, and pretending otherwise in the name of charitable interpretation is its own kind of failure. The person who has demonstrated a clear and consistent pattern of harm doesn't deserve the benefit of a doubt that amounts to willful blindness. Discernment still matters. Judgment still matters. The question isn't whether to ever assess people, it's whether to treat every assessment as final. The distinction Carnegie is drawing is between evaluation and verdict. You can evaluate what you're seeing, form provisional assessments, make practical decisions about trust and proximity, without delivering a permanent sentence on the totality of who someone is. Holding that distinction is harder than it sounds, especially when an emotion is running hot. But it's the thing that keeps your assessment honest and your mind open to new information. Because people change, genuinely. Not always, and not automatically. Rita Mae Brown reminded us that a mistake repeated more than once is a choice, and patterns matter. But people change. The person who failed spectacularly at 30 is not necessarily the person they will be at 45. The one who hurt you badly in one chapter of their life may have done work in the years since that you haven't seen. The public figure whose worst moment defined them in the court of opinion may have spent the decades since doing something quietly different. Carnegie's question isn't asking you to pretend that didn't happen. It's asking whether you're certain enough about the ending to close the book while it's still being written. Most of the time, you're not. Most of the time, none of us are. And that uncertainty, if we're honest enough to hold it, is the beginning of something more useful than a verdict. It's the beginning of understanding. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think of someone you've written off, or a verdict you delivered on yourself that might deserve a second look, think about it for a bit. And in closing, wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. See you soon.